Hi, I'm David Berceau, and this afternoon I wanted to address a question that we're asked a lot, and that is why don't we permit others to duplicate our tapes and CDs so that they can then give them away for free and help to spread the message? Well, I think that's a good question, yet it's a question that can't be answered in just a sentence or two. But because I think it is a worthwhile question, I want to take a little bit of time this afternoon to give you a thorough answer to the question. And it really begins with the history of scroll publishing. We started out in 1984 as Scroll Christian Bookstore. And Scroll Christian Bookstore was a rather unique bookstore. I had been very bothered by the commercialization that I saw in typical Christian bookstores, and I felt like this isn't how the gospel should be spread, through just hyping this particular book, that as bestseller. And in fact, a Christian bookstore looked no different than any other bookstore. And so I thought, wouldn't it be nice if somebody could have a Christian bookstore and just put all the books out at cost? And then people could come in and just get whatever books they wanted at wholesale cost, and then just the whole thing run on voluntary contributions. When the idea first came to me, it was beyond my means, but it was a dream that I was praying would someday I would be able to fulfill. Well, the answer did come in 1984. One of my wife's aunts died and left her a bit of money, and my law practice was going full bloom at that time, and I was earning quite a bit and had some surplus money to put into it. So Deborah and I started a bookstore. We had $20,000 cash that we put into it. Well, things started pretty slow because we didn't have money for advertising, but then word of mouth started getting around about this bookstore where everything was at cost, and they just ran off of donations, and everybody who worked there was a volunteer not getting paid. Well, before very long, we learned just how much work running a bookstore is. We had no earthly idea going into it. It looked like a fairly simple, kind of happy kind of project to spend, 2 or 3 hours a week to put things on the shelf, and that was it. In a month or two, Scroll Bookstore had totally taken over our lives. Deborah and I had no free minutes to ourselves. Well, after about 9 months of that, we were being run ragged. The donations were coming in, but they were falling short. We were operating in the red, and Deborah and I were having to make up the difference out of our pocket. And we had seen that the work was a lot more than we had originally imagined. Number two, we saw that volunteers did not work very well because people would work 2 weeks and then they would quit. Sometimes they never showed up. They would sign up, oh yeah, I will be there on Tuesdays or something, and then they would never come at all. But in general, there was just this enormous turnover of people, and the vast bulk of the store fell upon Deborah and myself. Well, when word got out that we were going to close down Scroll Bookstore, people just deluged us with letters and phone calls. Oh, don't do this. Some of the people who had originally volunteered, came over and they said, look, we know we've kind of fallen down on the job. Everything has fallen on you and Deborah. We will pick up the load. People said, look, if you're not getting enough donations, just tell us, why don't you just put the books out at what you need to cover your overhead instead of the donations? Well, we heard from so many people, we felt it was the voice of God, and so we kept the bookstore running. We changed it so that everything was out at a 30% discount instead of a 40% discount, and we had a sign saying, if you want to take an additional 10% off, you can do that. But before very long, the same thing happened with the volunteers. They would work for a while, and then they would lose interest. It would be too much of a strain. They already had full-time jobs, etc., and to add this on top of it was just too much. And so again, it was Deborah and I doing nearly everything, and just it was taking every free minute of our lives. Well, finally in 1988, when I was writing the book, Will the Real Heretics Please Stand Up? I felt that God was calling me to be a writer, and so we put out a notice that we weren't going to be able to run Scroll Christian Bookstore anymore, but if anyone else would take it over and run it on the same basis, we would just give it to them. And there was a Christian ministry in town that said they would like to do that, and they had a brother in mind who would be the manager. Things went a little different than we first envisioned, but it's turned out pretty happily. Well, we had learned a lot from that experiment that we carried over with us to the publishing when we started Scroll Publishing. First of all, we had seen that running a Christian bookstore is an enormous job, that it can't be done just by non-paid volunteers. It's too complex, it's too demanding, unless it's going to be some little tiny thing like a church bookstore or something like that. But that you needed a well-paid manager, somebody who could support his family on what he was being paid, because it was a full-time job and it needed that kind of attention. As we examined the scriptures, we saw that this was really the scriptural model. God expects that people who give their full time to spreading the gospel, for working for the kingdom of God, that they're to be supported by the gospel. 1 Corinthians 9, verses 3 through 11 says, "My defense to those who examine me is this: do we have no right to eat and drink? Do we have no right to take along a believing wife, as do also the other apostles, the brothers of the Lord, and Cephas? Or is it only Barnabas and I who have no right to refrain from working? Whoever goes to war at his own expense? Who plants a vineyard and does not eat of its fruit? Or who tends a flock and does not drink of the milk of the flock? Do I say these things as a mere man? Or does not the law say the same also? For it is written in the law of Moses, 'You shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain.' Is it oxen God is concerned about? Or does he say it altogether for our sakes? For our sakes, no doubt, this is written, that he who plows should plow in hope, and he who threshes in hope should be partaker of his hope. If we have sown spiritual things for you, is it a great thing if we reap your material things?" Likewise, when Paul wrote Timothy, this is 2 Timothy 2, 4 through 6, he reminded Timothy, "No one engaged in warfare entangles himself with the affairs of this life, that he may please him who enlisted him as a soldier. And also, if anyone competes in athletics, is he not crowned unless he competes according to the rules? The hardworking farmer must be first to partake of the crops." And again in 1 Timothy 5, 17 through 18, "Let the elders who rule well be counted worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in the word and doctrine. For the scripture says, 'You shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain,' and 'the laborer is worthy of his wages.'" Now, I think the ideal is when a ministry can operate purely on free will donations given by those to whom they minister. But what we saw from our bookstore is that although Christians will give generously to missions and to ministries that feed the poor and things like that, that they would not give generously to help operate a nonprofit Christian bookstore. In fact, a lot of people told us, "Look, why don't you just put the things out at the price that you need to cover all of your expenses? That would be a lot more simpler, and I'm happy to pay that. But don't put it out at that price and say, well, we need donations on top of that." Now, about the only exception I know of that rule would be denominational publishing houses that do get support often from all of the churches that are in that denomination. But even they sell things at normal prices. They just need the donations just on top of that, because a small publishing work is not usually very profitable. Well, very soon we learned that operating a publishing house is as much work as managing a Christian bookstore, perhaps even worse if you're selling directly to the public like we are, because now you have to box the the books and get them wrapped and take them to the post office or to UPS, where when you had the bookstore, you just had to put them on the shelves and people served themselves. I had wanted at that point to retire from law and devote my full time to writing, but I quickly saw that even though Will the Real Heretics was well received and we quickly sold out our initial printing, that there was no way that I could make a living from writing books like Will the Real Heretics Please Stand Up? Even though I had spent just about a full year of my life in writing the Heretics book and in getting Scroll Publishing set up and all of that, I've never received a penny from Will the Real Heretics Please Stand Up. I have never gotten any royalties from it. So this has never been about money, and yet it was always my dream to be able to give my full time to getting the genuine message of Jesus Christ out, being able to write full time instead of having to squeeze it in around my law practice. All right, let's move now to the subject of tapes. The original tapes we made were actually just audio letters people would write and say, what did the early Christians believe about divorce and remarriage or something like that? And so that's where the tape ministry started, and they were just free. I would just send it to somebody. Within a few years into the ministry, a small fellowship grew up where we lived, and on Wednesday nights, I was teaching on what the early Christians believed on some of the basic doctrines, and we tape recorded these. We were getting lots of letters from readers who were wanting to know more about the early church, particularly after the book Common Sense went out. People read it and said, we agree with your premise, but we don't have time to read all of these writings. Could you just tell us, what did they believe about salvation or baptism or that sort of thing? Well, like I say, we had made these tapes there in our midweek Bible study and prayer night. So we bought a commercial duplicator and we started duplicating these and sending them out to people when they asked. In fact, at some point, we had quite a number of people who were very interested in the ministry and what we were doing, so we compiled a list of the topics that we had. People had asked us, what different topics are covered on your tapes? And I think at first we had maybe 8 or 10 different topics, and so we prepared a form and would send that to people and say, just check off the titles that you're interested in, and we'll send them to you free of charge. And then we had a note at the bottom that although we do this free, that it isn't free to us, that there is a cost involved, and we appreciated donations. Well, 2 things we saw right away. Almost everybody, when they got the list, they checked off every single title, which we hadn't anticipated. Number 1. Number 2, very few people donated anything. And so the tape ministry very quickly became quite a financial drain on Scroll Publishing. And unlike charity, we didn't have a big church. We were just 5 or 6 families. Well, then people began asking for better recordings. The recordings were made, like I say, in these Bible studies. There'd be babies crying or people getting up and walking past the microphone, and you could hear their footsteps. Or there would be fade-ins and fade-outs. Someone would ask a question, but on the tape you couldn't hear what the question was, and stuff like that. So we sat down, we remade the recordings. We bought a professional tape recorder, which I think was about $500. And then later we bought an expensive mic, which was a couple $100. Well, the demand for the tapes kept growing, although the donations coming in were still very minuscule. Well, the tape duplicator we had couldn't keep up with demand, so we saw we had to get a bigger one that could record like 3 copies at a time. The one we had just made 1 copy at a time, although it was at very high speed. And so we saw it wasn't going to work for us to be able to offer tapes on an ever-growing demand, and particularly on additional subjects, without better funding for them. Because these were now not just a Sunday sermon. I mean, I preached every other Sunday without any charge for that. those were tape recorded, and we were happy for people to have those and to record them themselves, to make duplicates, whatever. But now with the tapes on these subjects, it grew a little different. People wanted a better quality recording, and these were taking quite a bit of research to prepare. It was a little different than an ordinary Sunday service. Also, we wanted to be able to get them into bookstores, because that's how we've always wanted to run Scroll Publishing, is that the distribution would come through bookstores, through mail order catalogs, not us having to deal directly with the Christian public. And so we added cardboard liners to the cases. We got the tapes themselves professionally printed, and all of that ended up costing quite a bit of money. We invested thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in building up an inventory of pre-printed tapes, and quite a bit of work in printing up the liners and designing them and putting them in. We now had to pay someone to fold it, put into the cassette case, and someone had to put the tape in there and then wrap it and send it off. We started charging $2.95 per tape, which covered our costs, and it gave us a little bit to help cover the overhead of Scroll Publishing. For all of this, none of us at Scroll Publishing were receiving anything. Well, as I mentioned earlier, at this point, we could see that running a Christian publishing house was a lot more work than running a Christian bookstore, and we just couldn't handle it, Deborah and I. We were doing all of this from our house. It had taken over our house. It had taken every minute of our time. So with hard work, Scroll Publishing, gradually began making a little bit of a profit, where finally we were able to pay a young couple in the fellowship $5 an hour to answer the phone and to ship the packages out. And then I handled all the bookkeeping and, making the tapes and all of that, and again, never got a penny for any of that. Well, for several years, that's how Scroll Publishing was run. A couple would do it for maybe 3 months. I think the first couple, they lasted 3 months, and then I think they had another baby coming or something. It was just too little pay, too much work. They needed more income, so they passed it to another couple in the fellowship. And then they did it for several months, but then they decided to move to a different church, and so they turned it back over to us. Well, finally, we did have a couple who stayed with it for a couple of years and did an excellent job, and Scroll grew quite a bit at that time, and the tapes became fairly popular, and at $2.95, it provided enough to pay that couple, I say, $5 an hour. And I still worked myself without any pay, and so did my wife, Deborah. Well, after a number of years, Scroll ended up back in our lab, and it appeared to me that this was pretty much the end of the road for Scroll Publishing. Deborah and I were just thoroughly worn out, and so were our families, and we thought about just closing it down at that point. But a family in the church volunteered to take it over, and unlike any of the previous people who had helped us, the sister and her husband had both been CPAs, so they had the accounting knowledge where they could handle the book work. All of the other years, we had people answering the phone and filling the orders, but all of the bookkeeping that publishing entails all fell on me because I was the only one who was familiar with doing that. And so we were able to just totally step out of the picture. They took Scroll Publishing, lock, stock, and barrel. Any profits that they got were theirs to keep. Well, it maybe made $800, $1,000 a month, helped them make their mortgage payment and a few things like that, but that was basically it. And I really didn't think I would be involved again with Scroll Publishing. I certainly didn't think I'd be writing any more books. But 3 years later, this was just a couple years ago, things changed in our life, and I was ready in the family to give Scroll Publishing another try. It was slowly dying because we had nothing new that had come out in years, and the new family, they were working so hard, and they had so many things going. I still marvel at how they even got it done. But they had no time to get out catalogs, and so there hadn't been a catalog in years. And like I say, scroll publishing was just slowly dying. And so we thought we would give it one more try. But with a firm commitment, we vowed to ourselves as a family we would not let it develop into the nightmare that it had been, where we had no time for anything. And so our thought was, let's simplify it. We'll drop the books of other publishers. We'll just carry our own, and we will try to distribute primarily through bookstores and catalog distributors, if at all possible. Well, as we got back into publishing, God placed it on my heart to write a book about the kingdom of God. And that was the book, The Kingdom That Turned the World Upside Down. And that book affected me so much in the writing of it that by the time I was finished, I had decided to quit my law practice and to spend my full time in the publishing ministry. And for me, that was quite a leap of faith, because for all of those years, that was like 13 years, the only thing that had kept Scroll going was the fact that I had my law practice, because Scroll was not able to support us as a family. And often, again, I was having to loan money to Scroll out of my law office earnings in order for it to have the money to print new titles or to get new equipment. And then just a little over a year ago, I'm making this in January of 2005, we published the first catalog that had gone out in 4 years as far as a general catalog, and sent out a general mailing. Well, the response to the Kingdom book was tremendous, even greater than what we had had with the book, Will the Real Heretics Please Stand Up? Also, shortly before that book came out, we began experimenting with making CDs and putting some of our tape titles onto CD. The initial motivation was the fact that we were having a lot of problems with the tapes. If you put stickers on them by hand, that was an awful lot of work, and we were all very tired of that approach. And so, as I mentioned, we, several years before, had started having them professionally printed up. But we found that if they weren't in a climate-controlled place, that the tape would stretch if it got either or shrink, I guess, if it got too cold, or stretch if it was too hot. And so then the tapes would sound garbled after we would send them out. So we had to keep them in our house, to have them at a comfortable setting. So we had tapes all over everywhere, number one. Number two, the tape duplicator was, a high-quality professional duplicator that most ministries use, but it would make mistakes occasionally. A tape might stick midway through, and we would think it was recorded when it was only half recorded. Or like say that the tape itself would get garbled, something like that. We found that tapes aren't all the same length. Even if they say 60 minutes, some are 61 minutes. I think they're all at least 60 minutes, but they vary in size. And so sometimes when we made our master on, say, a 60-minute tape, it was actually 61 minutes, and we didn't realize that. And then when we would make duplicates, the tapes that were only 60 minutes, like they're supposed to be, would lose the last minute. And so people would call and say, hey, you just stop in the middle of a sentence. And so we'd have to send out duplicate tapes, and we would continually get calls, the tape is blank or it's defective. So we had to start hand testing all of the tapes, listening to them in the front and the back to make sure they were all there. And it was so much work. I mean, we decided let's just get out of tapes entirely. Well, like I say, it was at this time that CDs were now becoming much more popular, and I saw ads for equipment that could duplicate CDs and also electronically verify it, so we would know whether the CD was defective or not. We wouldn't have to go through all of this work. And so we had started with putting out CDs. Our first ones just had a title, printed in black, and it was a white CD, and it would go out. But we found that we'd seen this with our books, if you put a nice cover on it that catches people's attention, people do judge books by their cover. And we'd seen that in our bookstore. And so we saw this with the CDs. We hoped to get them into bookstores, and we wanted to have inviting labels on them that people looking at them, it would be something they'd want to take home and listen to. So anyway, with the catalog, we introduced these CDs on a large scale, and they were very well received. And I felt like God had answered our prayers. We had stepped out in faith, and now finally we had 2 books that were keeping Scroll going, and the CDs were playing a big role, just like the tapes had once done, but they weren't near as much work as the tapes. That is, in duplicating them. Making them took just as much or more time. And like I said with the tapes, the nice things with the CDs is you can make, 10 or 20 at a time. If a topic people turn out aren't interested in, you haven't invested in 5,000 copies that now sit in your warehouse. And so it made it feasible to have much more topics. So we could have a complete catalog between the 6 or 7 book titles that we have, plus the many CD titles, which now I think we have 62 titles. So I feel like we're finally at a point where Scroll Publishing can provide us with support as a family so I can devote my time to teaching and writing. But I think perhaps because we try to project a very professional image of Scroll Publishing, that we probably also project a misconception. We're not some large company. As you've been listening to the history of this, don't imagine, well, now things have changed now. No, it's still a family operation. Scroll Publishing is operated out of our house. There's still not enough funds for it to be able to buy its own building. We have a warehouse that Scroll Publishing funds did pay for, a metal building, but that's it. We have to ship out of our house and keep the tapes in our house where it's climate controlled. One of the bedrooms of our house is my office that I operate out of. So we're still a very small operation, and it's basically taken over our home, and I know Deborah would appreciate it very much when, if ever that comes, Scroll would be able to be moved out of the house and have its own building for all of it. But financially, it's just not at that point yet. It's still a nip and tuck kind of situation. We are in the black every month, but not every month is there enough to even pay us the small amount that we're trying to be able to live on from Scroll Publishing. And the workload, as always, has been absolutely tremendous. As a family, the three of us combined, I would say that we easily put in 90 hours a week. And that's really an unacceptable workload. It doesn't allow my wife the time that she would like and I would like for her to be a homemaker, to have enough time to really invest in home education for our son. I mean, he's being homeschooled and we're keeping up with everything, but we'd like to devote a lot more time to that, and I would like to be much more involved. Since we've moved to Pennsylvania, my workday is, I get up at the office usually by 8 o'clock in the morning and work till lunch, take a 45-minute lunch break, a supper break, some things like that, and often I'm here in my office till 11:30 or 12 p.m. at night, and then the next day it goes right over, and even Saturday I generally have to work a similar schedule. And again, I can't keep that up. We're trying to get things honed down, hopefully be able to farm out part of the work so long as the finances are there where we can afford to do that. So that brings us to the topic of this message about duplicating our tapes and CDs. Nobody is getting wealthy off of Scroll Publishing. Nobody ever has. I've never received any royalties from my books. Well, the only one I get royalty on is the Dictionary of Early Christian Beliefs, which Scroll does not publish. And on that, I get 35 cents for each one that sells, which is not any great sum of money. But the finances of Scroll right now are very heavily tied to our CDs. If the CD ministry collapses financially, well then Scroll is going to go down with it, because I cannot write enough books, and I don't want to write them, just churn out books in order to make a living. I want to have a message as the reason why I'm writing a book, and if I don't have a message on my heart, then I don't want to write a book. Now, it's not the loss of sale that we care about. When you ask, can I copy these and then give them out, that we're thinking, well, let's say you give out 50. If you got them through the evangelism rate, that'd be $100 for us, and now we're not going to get that $100. That's not what we're concerned about. What we're concerned about is that if people start making homemade copies of our CDs and tapes, those are going to get into circulation, and pretty soon they're going to be showing up just about everywhere. And people are going to rightfully assume that this is something that they're authorized to do. And so why would they want to order a CD from us and pay the full price, which I feel at $4.95, we're putting them out at quite a reasonable price, far less than what CDs normally sell for, when they could just make their own copy. And so the irony is that you want to help get the message of scroll publishing out, which is the message of Jesus Christ, and yet you want to use a means to do it that's going to end up undermining scroll publishing and causing it to end up ceasing its operations. Because as I've said, the workload right now is really far too much for us. We need to be able to farm some of this workload out, and we need all of the revenue that comes in if we can ever hope to do that. And like I say, if the CD ministry ends because people can just get them for nothing, well, that's going to pretty much be the end of the whole publishing ministry. It's been a lot of hard work and sacrifice for 15 years now. We feel we finally turned the corner and would like to be able to keep that. The other reason we don't allow our tapes and CDs to be duplicated is that sometimes, it doesn't happen very often, but sometimes I feel like I made an error on a subject. I certainly came to that conclusion on the subject of apostolic succession. Now, it's very nice that we could simply stop distributing the tapes that we had on apostolic succession and replace those with a different message. But see, if those tapes were just out there circulating on their own, there'd be no way we could stop it. And so information that I would feel is incorrect would be out there circulating in the name of David Berceau, in the name of scroll publishing. And that's one thing we absolutely do not want to ever happen. So what are the alternatives? I think for most people, $2 a CD they feel is a very reasonable price. Our out-of-pocket cost to produce one of our CDs is right at $1. Now, I know you can go out and find blank CDs at Sam's or Staples or Best Buy, something like that, often for as little as 20 cents each, and sometimes with a rebate you can get them for free. But those types of CDRs won't work for what we are doing. For one thing, when you're making high-speed duplicates, you have to have the absolute top quality CDRs. The ones that are sold so cheaply are ones that failed the tests by the main manufacturers who make CDRs. Now, they still will work fine, and the defects in them are so small that the ordinary person would never detect them. But the equipment that we use to do duplication on, it catches every little imperfection, or at least theoretically it does, and it seems to work that way, and then it rejects those, and so you try to copy with them, and some of them copy, and then, 1 out of 3 is maybe good, and the rest are rejected and ruined, so they end up being actually more expensive. So we use the very top-of-the-line CDRs, Tayo Yuden, which is the company that invented CDRs in the first place, and is what the manufacturers of our duplication equipment recommend that we use. The other thing that's different about our CDRs than what you could buy at an office supply store or a Walmart or something like that is that they are inkjet printable. An ordinary CD, you cannot print on it with an inkjet. Now, the inkjet printers we have are special printers made to print onto CDs, but it's still a basic inkjet process, and there has to be a special coating on the CDs. And so that's what we buy, and they cost us about 45 cents each. You would be very surprised to find out how much the ink costs that we put on our CDs to have vivid labels on them or vivid images on them. When we first started printing our CDs, the cost for just the ink was about 35 cents a CD. Now, we found ways to bring that down, and we've bought some expensive equipment, but that uses Hewlett-Packard inkjet cartridges, which are cheaper than the proprietary ones we had originally been using, and we've got the cost down to about 14, 15 cents each. The little cases we put them in, they cost us 15 cents each, and the cellophane wrap is another nickel each. And then you add about 20 cents in labor because we have to pay somebody to insert the CDs in the case, to duplicate the CDs, to print them, and then finally to put the outside wrapper on them, which 20 cents a CD, it may actually come out to a little higher than that. But basically, we have $1 invested in each CD. That's our out-of-pocket expense. Now, the reason we don't make them available at the dollar price for evangelism is that would absolutely swamp us and would be very detrimental to scroll publishing. I mean, right now with the books, the vast majority of books that we sell, The Heretics, The Kingdom That Turned the World Upside Down, the vast majority of the copies we sell are evangelism copies where we're getting just $2.75 or $3 a book. And that is one of the reasons why Scroll has never been able to pay a very good wage to anybody. But we want to get the message out, and that gets the message out at that price. Now, books, they're already there. They're printed by somebody else. We get a shipment of cases, and so sending out 10 books to someone isn't that hard. The CDs, we have to sit and hand make those. I mean, they're made, duplicated by machine, but I mean, we have to do all of the work ourselves in inserting them into the machines, getting it set up for what title to print or to duplicate, and then when they're duplicated, to get them set up in the inkjet printer, get the right file to print out the image, all of that sort of stuff. And there's much more to the cost of producing a CD than just the out-of-pocket expenses for the blank CDR and for the ink and the case and that sort of thing. There's the overhead, the duplicators that we've had. So far, we've spent close to $10,000 on duplication equipment. We started off with a $1,500 duplicator. We got 8,000 CDs out of it before it just finally quit working and was beyond repair, which I think comes out to about 20 cents a CD, just the cost of that equipment. And that doesn't include the cost of the printer, which was, again, somewhere around that same price. But as things grew, we saw that we are wearing that entry-level duplicator out, and so we've gone to much more expensive equipment that hopefully will last a lot longer and we'll get more copies out of. But we got a lot of money invested in that the CDs have to carry their share of that, or pretty soon the machines are going to break and we're not going to have the money to replace them. At the same time, they're also, each item that we sell has to carry its share of the cost of somebody answering the phone, somebody packing and shipping the materials, all of the customer service issues that come up, maintaining our website, putting a catalog together, printing the catalog. You see, there's all of these costs that have to be borne there. And at $2 a CD, that really doesn't cover it all. But we feel, okay, we're not being hurt at the $2 price. It doesn't help scroll publishing, but it doesn't sink us either. To go lower than that would be a detriment to scroll publishing. The amount of work involved would not truly be covered by that price. So that's the reason why things are the way they are. Now, having said that, I want to present some other alternatives to those of you who have asked about this. This is a CD that is not being sent out for general circulation. Please do not pass this CD on to anyone else, or the things I'm about to say, we'll have to end those as well, because we could not do it on a large scale. There are some alternatives that we're willing to make for those of you who feel you cannot pay the $2 price, because we do want to see the message get out there. But I should say that most of the CD titles are not designed for the general public or for the general Christian public out there. Most of the titles deal with what did the early Christians believe on different subjects, and unless somebody has read, for example, Common Sense and is convinced that the early Christian writings are the best commentary on Scripture, then they probably aren't going to care what the early Christians believe. They're going to shrug it off and say, well, they were off base on that. And so I don't know that it's wise to just be handing them out indiscriminately to people. So let me just say that as a caution. But anyway, with that caution, for those of you who feel, again, that the $2 price is beyond your range, we've decided we will let you get evangelism copies for $1 each. Like I say, that'll cover our out-of-pocket expense, and we can't go lower than that, or we're going in the hole each time. As it is, like I say, it's going to be a bit of work that really we won't totally be covered for, but we are excited that you want to get the message out, and we want to work with you. Okay, so that's one option. And on that, what you would need to do is just call us or write us. As I say, you can email us, but we are going to be doing away with the customer support email, because it's just gotten where we are all of the time flooded with emails. It's so easy for someone to sit down and just send out an email, and we just get flooded with these, and they take so much of my time, I can't get time to write and to do the things that I would like to do. So you may not be able to contact us by email, but call us. Area code 717-349-7033. It's there on our website or that. And just say, David has said we can get evangelism copies for $1, and this is what we'd like to do, and that would be fine. Or you could order it over the internet on our website at the $2 price, and then just put in there that David has said that we could have these for $1, and then we'll manually change the charges. I mean, the receipt will show that you're charged, $2 a CD, but we will manually change that where it'll only be $1 a CD that's charged to your card, okay? So that's one alternative. If you feel you can't handle the $1, then the next alternative I have for you is the CDs themselves cost us about 45 cents. If the $1 won't work for you, then what we can do is send you a printed but blank CDR that then you can record yourself with what message you want recorded on it. And to do that, we'll charge you 50 cents a CD, 5 cents over the cost of the CD itself, and a nickel just some of the handling charges on it, plus the shipping. But we'll ship it the cheapest way, and the shipping shouldn't be very much at all, another $1.50, $2.50, depending how many that you're ordering. Now, to order that, you definitely would have to do it over the phone. But now this would be the catch to it. We couldn't sell our regular CDRs at 45 cents because, like I say, just the ink in the CDR by itself would cost us around 60 cents. And that's not considering the cost of the wear and tear on the printer and on the duplicator. However, when we are at the end of a print run on a CD cartridge, we find that usually some of the colors, the cartridge has 3 colors: cyan, which is a blue, magenta, which is sort of reddish purple, and then yellow. We find that usually 2 of those colors will run out before the third one. Typically, we'll end up with blue at the end, and there's no more yellow or red left. And so the cartridge is no good at that point. But what we could do is print out versions of our CDs in just all blue. They would not have the homemade look. They would not be something somebody could duplicate at home very easily. And so they won't be an invitation for other people to start making homemade copies, because they will obviously be from scroll publishing and they'll have the copyright symbol on them. Now, there wouldn't be any cases, any cellophane or anything. You would just get a blank CDR with some sort of image and the title printed on it. And then you would have to record it on your recorder, and however you want to give them out. If you want to put them in envelopes or whatever, you would have to work that out on your own. Okay, so that would be a second alternative that we're willing to do if that's the only way it's going to work for you. Okay, a third option would be giving out tapes rather than CDs. Now, for a lot of our titles, that would not be an option. We have now nearly 30 CDs that are not available on tape, and that will probably keep growing. At the same time, I had mentioned we had been ordering pre-printed tapes, and we had to order large quantities. We have a number of titles that we have large quantities of that I'd like to just see get out in people's hands, and we would make those available to you at 50 cents a cassette. Now, our cost for those cassettes is about $1 because these were factory printed somewhere else. So they're not just the type of tape, a cassette tape you could just buy at the store. Now, that would be without a case or anything, just the tape itself, but a very professional-looking tape, the clear case with the printed ink on that we would be happy to let you have for 50 cents a tape, even though that's at a loss for us. But my fear is that at some point, maybe tapes will disappear. Everyone will have CD players, and then those would just be wasted. If that interests you, again, contact us and we can give you a list of what titles we have. There's maybe 12 or 14 titles that we have that situation for. The rest, we are down to just a few, and I would not want to do that with. Now, at some point in the future, we're not there right now, but at some point in the future, we probably will authorize people to make homemade copies of our tapes because we're going to eventually be phasing that part of the ministry out. But like I say, we're not there yet, and it would hurt us very bad right now for people to start just pirating our tapes and making homemade copies and circulating them. Okay, getting the message out doesn't depend upon a message that David Berceau has given. In other words, if you want to share what the early Christians believed about salvation or eternal security or baptism or whatever the topic is, there is nothing that is stopping you from making your own tape recording. You just get a copy, and probably most of you have a copy of the Dictionary of Early Christian Beliefs. It's not that expensive. And you could look up any topics we haven't even covered, and you have right there all of the quotations that I would be using or that I have used in making my CDs and tapes on various subjects. And so you're free. I don't mean to just plagiarize me, but to give the same message in your own words and to use those quotations, and then that would be your thing, and you could give them out free and tell people they can copy them, whatever you'd want to do. But it would have your name, not mine, and it wouldn't say Scroll Publishing on it. That would be your thing. And again, you're free to do that. So, Scroll Publishing isn't stopping you from getting the message out. It's just that if you want to use the things that we've invested a lot of time and work into. And then there's one last option that won't cover most of the topics. Over the last 15 years, I've preached at a number of churches. Presently, we attend a Mennonite church in Shippensburg, Pennsylvania, and I've spoken there now 5 or 6 times. They tape record the sermons, and those are free. You would just need to write the church and ask for a copy of each of the messages that I have given to the church. Now, although the church will send them out to you free, I think it would be appropriate to make some sort of donation to cover the shipping costs and the costs of the tape that the church has to pay for. Anyway, the address to write would be Shippensburg, Christian Fellowship. Shippensburg is Shippensburg. Address 1456 Rowe, that's Rowe, Road. And it's Shippensburg, Pennsylvania, 17257. Now, you're free to take any of those messages. I'm sure there will be ones in the future, and make copies and hand them out for free. Those are not copyrighted. Those are for free distribution. Well, I hope that this message has helped you maybe to better understand the position and the real-life situation of Scroll Publishing Company. And I'm hoping some of these alternatives will be right for you so that you can help get the message out like you care, and yet at the same time help Scroll Publishing to be able to continue on with its ministry. God bless you.